What's going on, everybody? This is Lawrence with Go Heels Tactical. Today, we want to talk about the P320 and some of the myths we believe in regards to issues with the P320. We want to acknowledge that there was an actual drop safety issue with the P320, in which the slide, if it dropped on the slide, the mass of the trigger would pull it back, and then therefore essentially set the firearm off, leading to an ND. Now that was corrected by Sig by changing the mass of the trigger. All right, so to speed things up, right now we're talking about the potential or so-called issue with the P320 going off on its own in a holster or elsewhere. So essentially, we're going to take a look at this in a second, but this here is the standard P320 X Compact. If we look at it, flat face trigger, no trigger safety. All right, we'll take a look first. Go ahead, clear. Firearm's empty, save firearm. So let's break this down real quick, just so we can show you what's going on. All right, so a few things we want to make note of. For, in our professional opinion, the only way to discharge this firearm under normal conditions is to pull the trigger. All right, we're going to show you why. Now, this is all based on all parts of the gun being in correct order and all being in a working order. Nothing's broken, anything like that. All right, so there's a few safeties on this particular P320, well, P320s in general. Now, the military version will have a manual safety. That is not the case on the X-frame. We have a few things. We have the block safety, right? Has its own spring. This is more of like a leaf type spring, not a coil spring, right? So pretty stiff. Leaf springs are pretty durable, but they can fail. And if that were to fail, basically this would just kind of flop around, right? This block safety keeps the striker from going forward. So unless that block safety is pushed in, striker can't go forward and into the breech face, all right? So this block safety is pushed on, right, by this here. As you take up the trigger, that actually starts to push up, right? When that pushes up, pushes the block safety out the way and disengages it, right? Once you get to the wall, then you would pull the trigger past the wall and basically it would push down the main sear, right? The main sear has two springs, a primary face, secondary face. The primary face were to snap off, the secondary sear would grab onto the striker, preventing it from going forward, all right? If the springs on the sear went bad, there's two springs, coil springs. If they go bad and were to break, and the sear could just flop around, it still wouldn't set the firearm off unless the trigger was taken up and your block safety was disengaged, right? Now, even if those springs went bad, the striker would still stay hooked onto the primary face of the sear, right? Just through pressure. Now, a jolt at that point could dislodge it, right? And it would start to go forward, but the block safety is still not disengaged because the trigger hasn't been taken up yet, right? So essentially, you would have to have a failure of this spring as well as the sear spring plus a jolt, right? To finally let the striker go all the way forward and have an ND. Now, if this spring were to go bad, essentially both of these would have to happen simultaneously, and the firearm have to be upside down so that gravity would pull the block out the way without a spring tension, right? So you can see that, the odds of that happening are getting smaller and smaller as we go through. Now, ultimately, unless the trigger is pulled to the rear, and all the other parts, if all parts are functioning properly, the trigger has to be pulled to the rear to disengage the block safety and the steer itself, all right? It's just not gonna happen without that. Otherwise, multiple systems would actually have to fail simultaneously for the striker to be able to go forward completely and strike an actual round, all right? So one cause that, could cause an ND are holsters, right? Holsters are basically model specific. If you could have a holster that's for a different SIG that's very similar, but could not be the right one. If it pinches here in the trigger well too much, as you reholster, it's essentially pinching the trigger and then forcing it back, which could potentially discharge the firearm. Coming from the military myself, essentially the military and law enforcement, they will reuse gear, right? It may not be the exact gear for that particular firearm, but if they feel that it fits in there good enough, they will use it to save money, all right? Which could be an issue that we're seeing. I think one of the lawsuits actually said that. That was a slightly different holster. But anyway, guys, this is getting a little bit longer than we wanted. Essentially, there is no way other than a broken issue for the gun to go off by itself without pulling the trigger, unless there's multiple failures at the same time, which we don't believe is a high enough probability not to trust a firearm. You should be essentially, after so many rounds, inspecting it, making sure your parts are good. If you shoot 1,000 rounds and don't check it after and check your parts, or have a gunsmith do it, obviously there's a potential for a broken part to happen, which could lead to that ND. But the firearm is maintained. Its current design is a sound design. All right, guys, this has been long enough. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll see you next time.